Today's talk is called A Wise Woman, a Violent Woman, and Two Incapable Men. I was quite pleased with the title when I came with it. We'll spend most of our time dealing with the wise woman. We'll look a little bit at the violent woman, and it's hard to avoid the incapable men. Our new series is called Influencers, as Jude's sort of introduced at the start of the service. In a sense, it's like a new trendy thing, isn't it, to be an influencer? But in a sense, as well, at the same time, it's just really that as human beings, we've monetized and tapped into the way that humans work. We have always had influences. We have forever been influenced, and we have always had an influence to figure out what to do with, to be responsible with. Now, you might think a title like that or the idea like that, God would not be that interested in. It might not really be something that he's overly concerned about, but just have a think for a second about the way that he communicates in the Bible. How does he communicate in the Bible? Who does he communicate through? Politicians, poets, dancers, singers, writers, people of incredible beauty and attraction, people of incredible strength. There's some incredible liars, one in particular, and spin doctors. And it's a story about followers and image bearers. God is interested, I would say, in the subject of influences, our influence, and what influences us. But as an aside to that, and I think we'll see this right the way through the series, he's interested in influences, but he delights to find influence in unexpected places. Don't know how familiar you are with the book of Judges. Let me put it to you that I don't think there's a more, let me use a Louis Theroux word, sort of manospheric book in the whole Bible. I don't think there's a more misogynistic book in the whole Bible than this time that we're looking at in the Judges. And when I say judges, you maybe have an image of somebody who is in a courtroom acting as a judge with one of those white wigs on, settling matters. Most of these judges judged because they were the hardest bloke there. They judged because they threatened the most violence, or they could gather together the best enemies. And the sense of judgment came that people would listen to these people because of the clout that they had. And that's pretty much all the way through this book of Judges, yet without explanation or qualification. I love the start of the story of Deborah. I love the whole story of Deborah, but it's just like there she is in the middle of the manosphere of people like Samson and Gideon and people like that. There she is, this woman who's in charge, a woman in what looks to be very much a man's world. And not only is she in charge, but unlike all the rest of these people who chase around acting violently and have to go after people, did you notice in the first couple of verses, she's got a palm tree that's hers. Danny and the kids are going to be drawing about it next door. All of the people flock to this woman, not because they fear her, not because they need her fight, but because Deborah will be wise. She'll be discerning. It says of her that she settles disputes. Boy, do we need somebody in our world who's able to bring settlements to disputes. She brings peace. And because of that part of her character, because of that skill set, people are drawn to her, and she is an authority figure in Israel. She's an unexpected influence. You can sort of see that there most strongly in verse 6 and 7. In a nation of people not listening to God, she's listening to God. In a nation of people not speaking up for God, this woman is speaking up for God, and God will save his people again through her. Let me just give you a quick fire through of the storyline, because I guess you can consume it as Andy read it out, but let me just sort of send to your minds in on a few verses, and I hope the tech team can keep with me as we go. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Verses 2 and 3, Israel's at war with Canaan. Their chief bad guy in ancient times, even now we've got chief bad guys, haven't we, is a guy called Sisera. And his boast, his threat is 900 ironclad chariots. It's like the ancient equivalent of a nuclear bomb, that sort of idea. You don't mess with somebody with an army like that. And Israel, and you can read between the lines of this one, the people are weary. The tribes, you see this particularly in Deborah's song in chapter 5 after this, the tribes, they're not motivated to fight. They don't want to fight. All of the hero warrior types that Judges is famed for have gone missing. And it looks, the text says a few times, it looks hopeless. And we see in verse 3, the people then, as they've done right the way through the book of Judges, cry out to God to save them. Even though they're in this, and this is the story of Judges again, a vicious cycle of choosing anything but him to follow. And God hears their cry, even though they're in this vicious cycle of choosing anything but him to follow. I don't know if that, when I read that and when that clicked for me, that was a really familiar theme in my life, that I've been in a cycle of choosing anything but God and finding myself in a spot where I cry out to him again and find that he listens and he's able to save. And then in verse 7, we see God speaks to Deborah. And this over the next few verses, he kind of says, see this terrifying army, this terrifying guy, Sisera. I'm going to give him and his army. And he's saying this to Deborah, this woman who seems to have come out of nowhere. I'm going to give him to you on a plate. And then she says to him, now go. I'm telling you, go, rally the people. He's there. They're there for the taking. And then you see in verse 8, and I really love this little exchange between her and Barak. She shouts up for what I assume to be the best of the incapable men, Barak, who's in hiding. And his response, just to have a little glance at it, we'll come to it in a sec, but I'll allow you to glance at it now, doesn't really inspire you with confidence. Verse 8. But together, this unlikely duo, almost out of nowhere, this woman and this incapable man end up, and this is kind of where the story builds towards, at the front of what is just an incredible, epic battle scene. Not unlike Henry and the Battle of Agincourt. The heavens open up. We see this more in chapter 5, but I'll take you through it. This is what happens. The heavens open. There's this huge battle scene in front of Deborah and Barak. The skies turn black. The heavens open. The heavy artillery gets stuck, not unlike the Battle of Agincourt. Deborah delivers a rousing speech, not unlike what I'm told about the Battle of Agincourt. And it's a victory for the ages. What do you say about a woman like Deborah and her influence? She's got a couple of things to say to associate us with this idea of influence and our influence. First of all, there's a power of first being what God made us. Before we are anything else, just being who God created us to be, having that idea in your head carries great influence. Deborah is one of these characters in the Bible who's often cited in conversations about the role of women in ministry, in leadership. And she's often cited in terms of how we view, particularly from a faith perspective, the idea of gender equality. She's one of these figures who sort of raises her head above the parapet and is often cited for one side or the other, because she breaks ground as a woman. She breaks ground in this story. In this book, it's obvious to see. Her gifting and her courage, along with loads of other women throughout the centuries, have challenged assumptions and imbalances that women have faced. She does that. That's part of her story. That's part of her role. But it's often the case with Bible characters, we can cheapen their worth when we come with our baggage and our questions before we've seen their questions and their travels. We can take away from what they offer. If we only come towards Deborah with our questions and our struggles, the issues of our day, we will miss something of the depth and the beauty of this woman and what she brings. Sometimes the Bible characters speak more fully when we just go towards them and ask them to speak if it's possible, that we don't put all of our baggage onto them, but we just hear them and see them for the men, and in this case, the women that they are. So Deborah's chat in this moment with Barak, it's really fascinating. I think the more and more I've read about Deborah, the more I've gone, yeah, she's awesome. She's really, really awesome. Literally at the start, and if you sort of dig around into the root words, it kind of explains all of this. She literally calls Barak out of where he is. She literally calls out this man of where he is, and kind of in verses 6, but more so in verse 14, you kind of catch a glimpse of her tone. I hope I'm not putting too much onto the text, but that's definitely how I read it. Barak is this hero guy in a time of hero guys for God. And Deborah kind of goes to him, shouldn't you be? There is a really serious situation going on out there, Barak. Shouldn't you be, as the hero guy, shouldn't you be further out towards the front? There's kind of an expectation on him. It reminded me a little bit of times when I'll shout around to the family that Saturday afternoon I'm going to cut the grass. I want to be a guy who cuts the grass. I want to be a guy who does all kinds of stuff on a Saturday afternoon. And I will chelp about being that kind of guy. And yet quite often of a Saturday evening, I am to be found collapsed on the settee with The Simpsons or something like that on the television. And it's not just that I'm watching The Simpsons. I'm actually not even watching The Simpsons. I'm scrolling on my phone. It's just that The Simpsons on. And it's not even that I'm scrolling on my phone, I've fallen asleep. I've completely gone missing from the kind of guy that is my role and the kind of guy that I'd want to be. Barak, in this storyline, is a guy who's gone missing. Maybe he was scared of Sisera. Like blokes can be scared. Maybe he had his own stuff going on, but he'd gone missing. And then in verse 6, Deborah comes to him and she says to him, she calls him out. Speaking the words of God, she says to this guy who's gone missing, you need to go. You need to go and be the man that God has shaped you to be. What kind of woman is Deborah? First kind of woman that Deborah is she's strong. She can lead. She's got authority. She's a trailblazer. I googled the trendiest term for like a authoritative, confident woman, and it said boss woman. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression. Forgive me, but she's a boss woman. That's the kind of woman that she is, and she's got boss energy. That is the kind of woman that Deborah is. But then look at what Barak says in this exchange. It's ace, and we get to see exactly what kind of boss woman Deborah is going to turn out to be. Barak says in verse 8, proper hero statement, this, isn't it? This is just about the most pathetic finding a bloke falling asleep on the couch you can get. I'll go, that's what he says. I'll go to the battle, but only if you're going. That's kind of the heroic statement that Barak puts out there. What does the boss woman say to that? Surely it kind of goes eyebrow raise, tongue in cheek. I'll go and do it myself. Then it's got that kind of. He's there for the taking. She's right there to respond in a sort of sassy, sort yourself out, Barak kind of a way. She could have taken him to the cleaners in this moment, but what does she say? It's her time to strike. It's her time to be this boss woman. But she says, I'll go with you. I'll be at the front with you. What kind of woman is this? She looks like a boss. But at the time to strike like a boss, she does the opposite of that. And she enables this incapable guy to become all that you might hope that he would be. She helps him. She partners with him. She lifts him. She's a boss. She's a leading woman. She's a trailblazer. She's an enabler and a speaker for women throughout the ages. But at the same time as she is all of those awesome things, she serves, she sacrifices, she partners, and she enables incapable men. I don't know if we've got chapter 5 up. We've got chapter 5 up. That's really cool. So chapter 4 is narrative. Chapter 5, not only is Deborah awesome, but she writes a song about some of this. Listen how she describes how she sees this. Read with me. On that day, Deborah and Barak, now it's my turn, Andy, to say the ridiculous names. Barak, son of Abinoam, sang this song. When princes in Israel take the lead, when the people willingly offer themselves, praise the Lord. Hear this, you kings. Listen, you rulers. Even I, will sing to the Lord. I will praise the Lord, the God of Israel, in song. When you, Lord, went out from Seir, when you marched on the land of Edom, the earth shook, the heavens poured, the clouds poured down water. This is the battle scene that's been played out in front of us. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar and of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned. Travelers took to winding paths. Villagers in Israel would not fight. Here she goes. They held back until I, Deborah, arose. Until I arose. This is how she sees herself. I think this is awesome. A mother in Israel. God chose new leaders when war came to the city gates, but not a shield or a spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. My heart is with Israel's princes, with the willing volunteers among the people. Praise the Lord. Do you see how she sees herself? There's a lot of titles that a woman like that could have given to herself, quite legitimately. Better than what I've come up with, boss woman, like warrior, leader. There's a load of stuff that she could have said about herself, but she chooses, or she sees herself as the mother of Israel. This woman, she will save them. Just imagine this picture for a second. This is an awesome picture. She will save Israel like a mother will save her children. I don't know how many glimpses you've had of mothers and what they will do for their kids. It's a beautiful, stunning, selfless, I would say God-shaped thing. And that is how Deborah sees herself. She's a boss woman. She's a warrior. She's a leader. She's an enabler of women. And yet she is at the same time a mother. And you will notice at the start of the text, a wife. What kind of woman is this? Every time in my prep, I thought I was getting towards the bottom of Deborah. She did something else that blew my mind about what motherhood was, about what womanhood was. She made it look better, fuller, more incredible. She doesn't seem to sit inside any of the arguments or campaigns of the day that we'd have. She seems to take the best of all of those fights and make them look more beautiful as she puts them all together. I need to be really careful with my time, but also with bigging Deborah up this much, because this isn't a be more like Deborah talk. Although if you're going to, she's awesome, but this is not a be more like Deborah talk, I don't think. And I don't think that is what the Bible is making this talk to be. It's a reminder that before we put our questions on what womanhood is, before we made our campaigns or our paths for women and men, and there are some really good ones, God had a path for women and men. God had a direction. God had a spirit. God had a storyline. Right from the start of his story, God had a storyline for women. And it's not that some of the ways that we will provide for women and men are not good and not great. It's just that God's is always better. And we get a glimpse of that in this woman, Deborah, who seems to be all different kinds of things. There are loads of paths marked out, especially for the young women and the young men in the room. Loads of paths marked out, loads of campaigns needed to fight, loads of things to crack on with to make the world a better place. But there is also a path marked out that we see in Deborah that God had in mind, that God marked out, and it points to him. That's the first thing. Second thing, when you're sure what's ahead of you, think about this in terms of influences. When you're sure what's ahead of you, you've got a greater influence on those behind you. Just look at Deborah's story. When you are sure what is before you, you've got a greater influence on those behind you. Just for a second, in your mind's eye, can you join Deborah and Barak on the front line? Deborah, it's an awesome. That's Christopher Nolan-esque. I've not seen the film yet, but Christopher Nolan-esque battle scene. He's sort of mapped out in front of us. Thousands of people there with this man, incapable man, and this incredible woman. Thousands of soldiers there, troops there, right behind them, ready to run into the front line, ready to fight and ready to die behind these leaders. And no doubt, and this is how I imagine all frontline experiences in battle to be, you're wondering and you're asking, why am I here? How have I got to this point? And if you trace it back, it's actually quite interesting to see how you've got to this point where tens of thousands of troops are ready to run into oblivion and give their lives and die. They got there because Barak called them. Why was Barak there? Barak was there because Deborah bravely called him. And she spoke up because even though in all of Israel it looked hopeless and the men at the time were incapable, God said to her and her alone, Go, Deborah, I have gone before you. I am giving Sisera into your hands. And in verse 14, there's like this moment when you can almost sense that they see the enemy through your mind's eye. They feel the closeness of death. And there's, as I imagine, all troops at war, where there's the voice in the back of your mind saying, run, clear off. When, as chapter 5 describes it, the skies before all these troops blacken, the rain starts to pour down, and this army, this impressive, unstoppable army that Sisera governs, with chariots clad in iron, gets stuck in the muck. And Deborah says, as she said before, she doesn't just say, she shouts it out to these troops. This is the day, as she surveys what's before her, this battle scene that God had promised. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? Go. She implores them. She says, look at this scene. God has given them into your hands. This is the victory that God has promised. And what started with just one woman wrestling with one voice from God mobilized a whole nation to stare down death. And it wasn't just numbers that she amassed. She amassed hearts and minds, people ready to run into death with her. Because she believed way back before the rain came, before she saw that the chariots would get stuck, that God was in the battle and that God had gone before them. It changes things, I think, when we know what's ahead of us. It changes what we are able to do when we know for certain what's coming. I don't know about any of you, but at about 9:45 on Wednesday evening, do you remember what happened at 9:45 on Wednesday evening? I got a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. Watching, for those of you who are still piecing it together, England against Argentina. I'm still sad in my heart about the whole thing. And I watched this game, and tragically, I was that guy who went, I know where this is going to go. I don't know if it was at the point when Anthony Gordon went off, but with about 20 minutes to go, I thought, I know how this story is going to finish. I know how it's going to go. I know where we are heading with this. Let me just ask you a personal, slightly invasive question. If you had to score yourself in that moment, particularly if you're a football fan, on banter, on kindness towards other people, for those 20 or 30 minutes as you're watching the end of this horrible game, on community spirit, what would you give yourselves out of 10? What would you get? But just imagine for a second, and we got a glimpse of it on Saturday night. Imagine if it wasn't that you knew we were going to lose, but you knew we were going to win. Imagine if you could look at that game and know what was in front of you in that sense, that we were going to win. I don't normally watch the footy with my dad and my brother. I used to love watching it with them, but we're too miserable, especially when England get beat, and we know that they're going to get beat down there at some point, so we don't do it anymore. See if I knew that they were going to win. If I knew that something like what happened last night might have happened on Wednesday night, if I knew that that was before me on Wednesday night, I'd have flung my doors open. I would. And I'm an introvert. I like a bit of my own space, especially experiencing stuff like that. But if I knew that we were going to win, I'd be on the blower to my dad and my brother. I'd be like, get here. We're going to win. We've got to watch this together. It would change everything about my social capacity and outlook. I would have flung the doors open. I'd be out ordering pizzas. I'd be like, come in here. England are actually going to win. It would have changed everything. I think we can go through life. We can go through aging, and we can go through health worries. We can go through our faith and our religion and our career and all those kinds of life things, like we're watching an England match. We can go through it all like that a lot of the time. When we think about how the job's going to go, when we think about how relationships are going to go, we don't watch. We don't look. It's too hard to watch. Let me give you the good news of the gospel in one verse. It's in Hebrews 6:19-20. And it flips all of that round for us. And I believe that is our view. We have a flipped view on this. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain where our forerunner Jesus has entered on our behalf. What does a forerunner do? In battle speak, in Bible talk, a forerunner goes into enemy territory, and they're able to assess and check whether everything's going to be okay. Jesus Christ is our forerunner for these lives that we live and lead. And the cross speaks a powerful message to us every time we look back towards it from wherever we are, whatever circumstance that we are in. The cross can speak from there. Jesus in the heart of the battle, and say, wherever you are, whatever you are facing, you need to know something, people living somewhere in West Yorkshire in 2026. It's going to be okay. The battle has been won. I was in it with you in the toughest moments. I was right there. So anytime that we look at a circumstance that comes in front of us, we're also looking at a cross that is somewhere in front of that, always before us, always in front of us, whatever the circumstance is, whatever we can't or daren't look at right now, God has been in that fight already. And he says, look back at the cross. See, I've been there. I came out the other side of that. It's going to be all right. And when you know that, when you have that glimpse, it can change things. He says to us, open up your doors, celebrate. You can celebrate. Even though it's going to be a really hard watch, you can celebrate this. Fling your doors open, get some pizzas in. We win in the end. Maybe even you'll be able to stare down some of that adversity that will come your way. And as you do that, in bigger ways than we are capable of imagining right now, we're able to point for and influence for God in all of our lives. Last thing, promise. And it's really clear in the character of Deborah. God delights to find influence in unexpected places. This is the violent woman part. We're just going to touch on her very briefly. We've thought a little bit about one of the incapable men and the wise woman. We're just going to look at the end of the story. It's a real shocking. I made a point of looking around at some people that were tuning into the end of this story. Particularly, I knew that the line about the tent peg going into the temple of Sisera was coming up, and there was some visible gulps as that happened, which I got a bit of a kick out of because I thought, oh, this is good. Everyone's into it. We see in the text that Barak, at least as he verbalizes it, he begins to bottle it. And then Deborah's response in verse 8 and 9 is really, really interesting, very Deborah-esque. She says, all right, I'll go with you, we'll go together. But because of this, see what she says? The glory for this moment will go to a woman. And maybe the first time you look at that, you're thinking Deborah's been a bit sassy and it means that she's going to get the glory. But that's just not Deborah. It might be the case that it's a bit more about women, but I think in this text, what it's actually about is God. I think that's what it's really about. In the ancient battles, and anytime we watch any films about this or read stories about this, and in a sense, it's still the same today. The winning moment of the battle, the moment of glory, the moment of triumph is where you get to crush the baddie, crush the skull of the baddie, particularly in these times. That's the moment of victory. And what Deborah says is, Barak, you're not going to have that moment. This is going to go to somebody that nobody is expecting. And then as the story plays out, the other incapable guy, Sisera, I know he's not incapable. I know he's probably awesome, but it's just to keep everybody engaged and have a bit of a laugh. This incapable guy, Sisera, flees the battle. A very unheroic thing to do. And he wanders into the tent of somebody. And in the storyline, if you read through the narrative, it kind of just feels like she happens to be there, this lady, Jael. And as he wanders into this tent and tries to, I don't know, get his breath back or hide, start to breathe again, she knew exactly who he was. And she drilled a tent peg through his skull. And the moment of glory went to this unexpected woman. Over and over and over again in the Bible story, whether it's David fighting Goliath, a little guy chosen to fight a big guy, whether it's Moses going before Pharaoh to speak to him when he couldn't speak, or whether it's this really, really smart woman in a man's world, God delights to show his power and his authority in ways that we would never expect. Through ordinary people that our world would often overlook and not notice, but he has in mind all along. That's kind of what the narrative would show us about Yale jail. And if you've got any doubts about the feasibility of that storyline, the person that changed our world more than anybody else in human history, the person of Jesus, was completely overlooked and shunned by everyone around him. And God, at the same time, knew exactly where he was because he'd placed him there. What does it mean for us in our ordinary lives, in worlds dominated by different powers than us, just as we go about our business? One of the things that it means, I think, is that we can never dismiss the place and the point in time that we are in. The place and the point in time that we are in our own story, especially when it's ordinary, when it doesn't sit inside the religious norms. God delights to confound expectations of power and strength. He delights to raise people up from nowhere. He delights to use the weak to confound the strong. He delights to use people who've struggled all their life to try and be righteous or try and be good. People that have struggled all their life with sin to save those who are stuck in sin and set people free. He delights to use people who daren't speak, who can't speak, to speak up for him. This is his story and what it means for us in our different environments. As we look at a bunch of stuff that we can't do, as we see our limitations, is we can't sit behind any of them easily because we find ourselves in a time, in a place, and in a story placed there by a holy God. Not only does he see us in these circumstances, but he places us there. Let's finish with a question. Are you more shaped by what the world expects or by what God expects? Are you more shaped by what's behind you or the good news that's in front of you?